15 years ago, Time ranked tweet as its number 9 buzzword of the year. According to the author, a tweet is a short message used to update family, friends, and anyone else who cares about your daily or even hourly activities. A definition that feels to me nostalgic. Reading this is like cracking open an old dusty tale of status updates and location check-ins, a past rapidly vanishing. This was Twitter's humble beginning, a beginning that Twitter would perpetually struggle to redefine without breaking its reputation. I remember talking about Twitter in public in the early days. It made you an easy target for confusion in teasing. Why not just live your life? Why do you need to update everybody on what you're having for dinner? The placeholder, what's happening, would take nearly a generation to be taken at all seriously. By then, it might have already been too late to trust the company who wrote those words. Of course, now, a year after Twitter has turned into something pretty much unrecognizable, it's easy to forget just how we got here. It was never really one man or one action. And what happened recently wasn't a takeover of an innocent startup. It was a chain of dominoes finally falling down. The warning signs were there. This was voluntary, unspontaneous combustion. Today, the edifice crumbles, and the only ones that seem to be sticking around are ones who cling to the past or are just downright angry at the present. Of course, with the exception of the stubborn journalists, news wires, and leakers. So yes, for most of us, it's easy to imagine a world without tweets again. Before we dig in deeper, I wanted to say thanks for tuning in. Last week I did a video on the future of YouTube, and I talked a lot about things related to what I'm talking about here, like the Fediverse and the future of social media and the democratized web. Make sure to check that out if you're interested. If not, still, please hit the like and the subscribe below so you can tune in. I try to post these just about every week, and there's a lot more to get to. Back in April 2023, I left Twitter for good after being there for well over 10 years. And I noticed something nostalgically familiar. On just about every alternative platform, there was still one constant, and it reminded me of Twitter's formative years. Everybody was out there asking, does anyone use this? And why is anyone here? I think pretty quickly the early adopters realized that question was probably gonna stick around, and we started to have fun with it. And that's when it started to dawn on me. A real lived history of Twitter, now the Goliath, would have to be told by the people that were there. We all had different experiences, different feeds, different reasons why we joined and stayed for so long. Without that history, it might be impossible to contextualize just how it became so prominent. And perhaps more interestingly, what the signs would be if some platform somewhere starts to overcome it or retrace those steps. Vibes aren't forever anywhere. Maybe we'll be able to enjoy them more, even capitalize on them as users if we understand our own trajectory. But before we get there, let's start with an overview. I think it's fair to say that Twitter started with the nerds, the power users. Over time, real-time feeds, hashtags, and a splash of algorithms hooked a loyal crowd of tech enthusiasts. And Twitter only got hungrier and hungrier. In fact, real-time started to pivot the company's attention from personal updates to professional calls to action. Primetime sports, large events, TV premieres. It wasn't a stretch for Twitter to believe that it could become a bespoke, glorified advertising conglomerate, much like its contemporaries. A pipe dream, perhaps, but from Twitter's perspective, that was the move. Sell up. It needed as many users as possible, and once it locked them in, it needed to make money from them. This was virtually a lifetime away from the acceptance of in-app purchases in subscription services. This was when social media monetization had but one answer for its stakeholders: ads. And the biggest ads come from the biggest partners. And so, as Twitter became hungrier and hungrier, it ate and ate 2008, acquiring countless companies on its warpath to win over traditional media. Even if it had won over its initial user base as a beacon for a free, democratized web, that wasn't important anymore. That image was already slipping from underneath them. The top priority was always engagement, and now not user to user, but user to business. Arguably, we went from power users and nerds to live events to professional sports and TV premieres, and then finally to brands. And there was no going back. But along the way, Twitter could never really make things happen when it wanted them to. As much as it promised and as many companies as it acquired, it could never truly innovate where it wanted to, when it needed to. And its most potent and recognizable features came from outside, not inside the company. Not every Twitter alternative is gonna stick around. We've already seen some fall, like the kinder and safer Pebble. And maybe it just leaned too much into those early days of Twitter. Our theory was always, if you can create a space where people really feel like they can let down their hair, then you would get that authentic content. We didn't quite get there, but as some platforms exit, others are only getting stronger. In Apple's list of the 2023 top free apps, Threads ranked at number 4. Just 6 months after officially going live, Threads is continuously finding ways to shortcut that normally gradual climb to the top. Controversially, it leverages its Instagram account system to already have a huge starting audience. And surprisingly, it's even built on top of the Instagram codebase itself. And the now underdog Mastodon is still thriving, competing every step of the way. Yes, Mastodon is technical, but in the same right, it's a technical marvel. It's obvious that each has its own culture, and each has cultivated outspoken supporters. And for better or worse, in some cases, those confident choose-your-laners. Thankfully, if any of these places scratches close to that micro-blogging domination, the users will actually win out. These would-be replacements have promised something unheard of. Cooperation. Somehow, even the Dorsey-backed Blue Sky has committed to a decentralized, open-source protocol of its own. And halfway through making this video, just last week, the Threads team surprised everyone. Simultaneous release in the EU, and the initial deployment of Federation. As foreshadowed, Threads will become another of the limitless ways to plug into the Fediverse, the subject of last week's video. With that, a wave of hope is surely cresting. As the mixing of profits, sponsorships, and social media becomes more muddled every day, here we thankfully have a tide-turning, cultural-defining difference. Microblogging as a business is somehow becoming an alliance, a shared effort, if you will, a mob. It's as if a state of war against Twitter and the walled gardens of the last 20 years have united us against a common evil. We now live in a timeline where the distinctly for-profit Instagram is on the same side as the anti-advertisements non-profit Mastodon. A sort of Hobbesian seek peace, but where that peace cannot be had, to use all the advantages of war. Hopefully, this was in reaction to the corporate monopolization of tech APIs that happened earlier this year, when sites like Twitter and Reddit effectively killed off the vast majority of their third-party apps, the pain of which is still fresh in the minds of the hundreds of thousands of now Tweetbot-less, Twitterific-less, and Apollo-less users. I mean, even before I had my first full-time job, I built clients for Reddit and Twitter with groups of friends or by myself. And those experiences kind of taught me more than any class in computer science would about working together and building cool products. In fact, I'd argue that building a Twitter app was kind of a rite of passage for amateur mobile developers at the time. Even then, Twitter was trying to clamp down on the sheer volume of apps and clients made for their supposedly free town square. Already, that trust was starting to erode. But it certainly got worse. Every day, more and more people, I'm sure, forget what that "from Earth" at the bottom of tweets actually used to mean. Now, it's just this strange vestigial remnant of the past. That little byline, already at one point removed and added back to the platform, used to be one of the most powerful tools of an ambitious third-party ecosystem. And dare I say, one of the nerdiest places for comedy, and maybe one of the most accessible ways to find out how people used Twitter. Oh, the days of tennis players sending out Samsung ads and Alicia Keys sending out BlackBerry endorsements via Twitter for iPhone feel so far away. Yes, and I agree with this commenter. This happens so often, it almost feels like a meme, and that was almost a decade ago. The departure of that feature in particular feels like an ironic wound dealt by the more meme than man who carried a sink into Twitter headquarters before he absolutely gutted it. Third-party apps were the lifeblood of early Twitter's innovation, features, and content. TweetDeck used to be one of the most popular independent apps for Twitter, with a breakthrough UI that used stacks of customizable columns to manage multiple accounts at once. Twitterific pioneered the word tweet, and its bluebird mascot even prompted Twitter themselves to later adopt a bluebird logo of their own. Yes, that once iconic Time 2008 buzzword, that now defunct tweet, microblogging's closest thing to genericization, was not made in-house. Hashtags came from Chris, also not an employee at Twitter, a user. And here he is today, one of the most outspoken critics of Threads' tagging system. A notable force of pressure, trying to shape the future of trending. The pull to refresh gesture, along with swiping cells and sliding panels, those were invented by legendary Apple alum Lauren Brichter, also for a third-party app, Tweety, which, just like TweetDeck, was bought and turned official. So I hope it's obvious the people, the power users, the nerds, built the foundation of Twitter. Not from the inside, from the outside. That's how the platform not only started, but also how it gained its familiar characteristics that we still expect today. Less than a year after tweet became a top 10 time-recognized buzzword, it was on the June 15th, 2009 cover article. It's in some ways prescient, and in other ways laughably ignorant of the tumultuousness of today. It started with the same attitude I saw as commonplace during those growing pains. The one thing you can say for certain about Twitter is that it makes a terrible first impression. You hear about this new service that lets you send 140 character updates to your followers and you think, why does the world need this exactly? By summer 2009, Twitter was spreading from friends and family to real-time news. Chris's organizational tool had turned into a full-blown headline tracking device. If something was happening, Twitter became a formidable vehicle to communicate because of its speed in any environment. And its simple way to attach yourself to a specific conversation, community, or event. And yet, we were barely scratching the surface as that Time article continued. Some celebrity Twitterers, most famously Ashton Kutcher, have crossed the 1 million-follower mark, effectively giving them a broadcast-size audience. The average Twitter profile seems to be somewhere in the dozens, a collage of friends, colleagues, and a handful of celebrities. In the past month, Twitter has added a search box that gives you a real-time view onto the chatter of just about any topic imaginable. They have already turned down a reported $500 million from Facebook. Thanks to these innovations, following a live feed of tweets about an event, political debates, or lost episodes has become a central part of the Twitter experience. But just 12 months ago, that mode of interaction would have been technically impossible using Twitter. It's like inventing a toaster oven and then looking around a year later and seeing that your customers have, of their own accord, figured out a way to turn it into a microwave. Even if it took over a year for Twitter to get its hallmark features, Twitter was branching out from friend groups to a titan of new media, much like Facebook during that same time. It would take Mastodon and Threads much less time to recreate those features and to retrace that path to early adopters, the people keen enough to turn a toaster oven into a microwave. Also, to revisit that topic of third-party apps, this last quote from the article is reaffirmingly sad given just how far detached we are from this time period. One of the most telling facts about the Twitter platform is that the vast majority of its users interact with the service via software created by third parties. Looking back, the years leading up to 2010 would be the slowest for Twitter's growth. From then on, things would prove completely different. In September 2011, Twitter would hit 100 million active users. March 2012, that would turn into 140 million users, with 340 million tweets every day. December 2012, that would turn into 200 million monthly active users. At the same time, Twitter tried to capitalize on that success and maybe make the learning curve easier for new users. By what else but forced algorithmic feeds. A few of these new ways of browsing Twitter came in the form of the Connect and Discover tabs, as well as brand pages. It's not just a visual redesign, but a conceptual redesign to make Twitter more accessible to the next billion users, said Satya Patel, a Twitter senior executive. Brand pages make Twitter an even more compelling destination on Twitter for their brands, as it sets its sights on long-term monetization of the service. And if it wasn't clear from this chart, this coincided with Twitter's use as a powerful tool for international difference makers. There was practically no better way to instantly update the world at large without self-hosting a blog and without even requiring the viewers to sign up or pay any kind of subscription. Blogs were the precursor, the predominant form of democratized text-based social media before Twitter. I mean, that's why Twitter is still described as a microblogging service. Between 2010 and 2012, a lot happened. And social media and free online speech became really important to more than just the North American audience. And incredibly significant global events won't always show up if you Google Twitter history or try to look at some kind of timeline. But they happened and were substantial to all platforms at the time. Just to name perhaps the most well-known, the Arab Spring. The most popular Twitter hashtags in the Arab region in the first 3 months of this year were Egypt, Jan 25, Libya, Bahrain, in protest. By the end of 2012, Twitter expanded from its 2009 effort to index on Google to support Russia's biggest network, Yandex. This looks like Twitter's first big deal with a Russian portal and could point to more local partnerships of its kind, useful for Twitter extending its coverage and usefulness beyond its home market in English. Real-time features, algorithmic timelines, and international growth rocketed Twitter. From the humble internet introvert to those who needed real social, political change. And ominously started to push it into the hands of some of the world's biggest brands and agencies. Yes, even at the protest of celebrity figures like Kutcher, who saw Twitter transform in all the good and evil ways from the beginning. Would Twitter stick around and try to encourage use as a political and life-saving tool? Not quite. Once expansion was assured, Twitter acted more like it wanted to colonize its user base and its would-be competitors, rather than be a champion of the people. What was next to conquer? How did Twitter plan to keep up the momentum? Instead of hoisting its users high and prioritizing success for its loyal fan base, it was time for takeovers. Dog eat dog. Arguably, next was a one-way ticket to Twitter's spiritual downfall. Its money-first downward spiral. If the rate of growth was slowing, it was time to convert its users into customers. By 2013, the sights were set on more than text. It was time to outgrow its use as a tool because, after all, Facebook wasn't just a tool. It was a money-making machine. Twitter wanted so desperately to be in that ring. Moving forward for the stakeholders meant disconnecting from Twitter's past, to unroot itself from the grounded tradition of friends and family and everyman conversation. It was time to convince the big media brands that Twitter was the next big thing. Quote, not to mention the uphill battle of convincing advertisers and big media brands that yes, Twitter ad spend is just as important to your marketing budget as traditional TV and print campaigns. Most of all, Costello needs to explain just what Twitter is to the billions of non-techies who may be willing to write the service off as just another way to tell the world what you had for breakfast. If that damning quote from the host of the All Things Digital conference wasn't enough, and if you don't believe me, believe the words from the man himself, Dick Costello, who was the CEO from October 2010 until 2015. The beauty of promoted tweets is that they go out as content, and they can be promoted to people who don't follow them. In other words, be like Oreo during the Super Bowl. Get wacky on the fly and make an ad that plays on what's happening at that moment. The kids will love it. Today, the vacuum of those brands and politics and government agencies can be a bit noticeable on alternatives like Threads and Mastodon. Twitter left a mark that's hard to erase. But maybe the longer we hold out, the more we'll be able to steer the directions that businesses do business on the platform. After all, their priorities are normally to do business instead of share ideas. In 2013, Twitter chose violence in the form of a rampant streak of acquisitions, nicknamed by CNN a hashtag buying spree. Mostly, Twitter was hunting for services in a similar category. Then it would shut them down and try to incorporate its features, ideas, and employees into its own. Normally, this didn't have much noticeable, if any, public-facing impact. There was Bluefin Labs, We Are Hunted, Trender, and MoPub. Finally, in November, Twitter would debut on the stock market. Its IPO most likely the impetus behind this attempted tech empire. But money didn't buy Twitter happiness. But over the past 5 years, Twitter has failed to fully convince what it wants its core experience to be used for. In its infancy, Twitter was a service built around basic, personal interactions with friends and acquaintances. This sentiment was echoed by the beloved echelon of Twitter's first wave of major celebrities like Ashton Kutcher. When I first got on, it felt like the democratization of media. Now it just feels like media. Now it's just a bunch of companies and people constantly pitching crap. I doubt most people recognize or remember the names of the acquisitions or products launched in the mayhem, like Twitter's ineffective hashtag music streaming service. But I think there still is at least one name, a name that still evokes emotions, much like the memories of baby Twitter, the memories of 140 characters in social instead of domination. That name is Vine. This might feel like rehashing old scars, but before TikTok, there was actually something smaller, simpler, with much the same audience of young, viral influencers to be. Acquired by Twitter in January 2013, before it even officially launched, Vine would soon be the proving grounds for thousands of new creators. At the time, just like how Twitter perplexed the outside world, Vine wasn't quite understood. And yet, the fires of Vine forged some of the most brilliant speakers and comedians of my generation. That was only the beginning. There was Vine, there was Musical.ly, now there's TikTok. At one point, they all sat on the throne. They all shaped the world of small form video content. They all helped to plunge us into the era we're still kind of in today. I think Vine was never properly handled by Twitter. It never really felt like they catered to the pool of creatives that they had attracted. Instead, it was still about this impossible drive towards profitability and focusing on advertisers. By March 2015, Twitter would spend $50 million, according to Business Insider, for an ad network for Vine stars. Niche. Maybe it should come as no surprise that the unaware public assumed that Vine stars were just raking in the cash. That same month, we'd see an almost word-for-word repeat when Twitter grabbed up Periscope, a live streaming proto-service that predates the Twitches and the TikTok lives of today. A year later, in December 2016, Twitter would splurge again for Yes, and in the process acquire itself a new VP of product. None of these services would last under Twitter's care. Yes was immediately shut down as part of the acquisition process. By the end of 2016, Vine was shuttered, and Periscope hung on until 2021. So, why did anyone use Twitter anyway? Was everyone tricked, either by the dizzying futuristic lights of a democratized web, or by traditional media bulldozing its way into the monolithic brand pages we have today? The answer is there never was just one Twitter. There were eras, each imprinted by innovation from the end user, before the inevitable spin to try to turn it into profit by the company upstairs. And truthfully, I'm glad that even though Twitter became one of the most powerful advertising tools of our time, its meteoric rise was counterposed by an even more devastating crash into darkness. So keep an eye out. The nerds come first. We already have a profound difference with the promises of collaboration on platforms like Threads, which has already started federating on ActivityPub and thus Mastodon and all of the federated network. International platforms were built on the same day between Threads and the EU. Mastodon was built in Germany and moved its way from Europe to America over 5 years ago. Professional sports and brands on these alternatives are growing day by day. Just search for NBA threads or tech threads or even photography. This time, let's keep the people first. Product over profit. Thanks for watching. You made it all the way to the end. Make sure not to forget to like and subscribe, leave comments about everything you thought about down below, watch last week's video if you didn't catch it yet, and I'm so excited to see you next time. Bye for now. Open source